Well, let's ask the Institute for Fiscal Studies Director, Paul Johnson. There is a temptation to go bears and woods here. But anyway, let's just start with your point this week, where you said there's a conspiracy of silence between the major parties to hide the truth of what the government will inherit. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is they don't really want to talk about the scale of the challenge facing them. Look, the government is effectively planning cuts in public spending over the next 5 years. That's what's in their budget numbers. The Office of Budget Responsibility, as well as ourselves, have pointed that out. They've talked about a 1% a year increase in public service spending. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, but we know that defence spending will rise faster than that. We know that health spending will rise faster than that. We know that childcare spending will rise faster than that. What's left is less than nothing for everything else, given the numbers that we've got. Now, both parties have tied themselves to exactly the same, in my view, rather bizarre fiscal rule, which is they want debt falling in the last year of the Parliament. So they've tied themselves to those things. So we have a choice. Either they are actually going to implement these spending cuts. I think that's highly unlikely, given the scale of the challenges facing the
because the numbers in some departments, they're talking about 10-15% cuts.
But we know that we've got prison backlogs, we've got justice backlogs, we've got local authorities going bust left, right, and centre. It seems to me implausible that they're going to implement those cuts. But they don't want to obviously talk about tax increases because that frightens the voters. But they have, as I said, tied themselves to this fiscal rule. Maybe they're just hoping they get lucky, though I have to say, I think on the balance of probabilities they won't, at least in the first budget, because if anything, the economic forecast that the last budget was based on was pretty optimistic. So what will they do? They're not telling us.
So your view is that at the very least, at some point, whoever's in government, they're going to have to find some money from somewhere. They're saying they're not borrowing, so it will have to be tax rises of some kind. Where might that come from, given they've ruled out rises in income tax, Labour's ruled out VAT and so on? What might we be looking at?
I mean, I do wish they'd stop ruling things out, because they may well find that they regret that when they assume office. Now, one thing it's worth saying is that there is a big tax rise nailed in. I mean, that's government policy, and it appears to be Labour Party policy, which is another 3 years of freezing income tax allowances and thresholds. That is an £11 billion tax rise just there. So that we're pretty sure we will get. Now, the sorts of things Labour have talked about so far, tax on private schools, private equity and so on, these are small numbers. I mean, I'm sure they'll try and, as it were, exaggerate the scale of those, but those are really very small numbers. What worries me, I suppose, is that we will then end up, because they've ruled out the sort of simple taxes, we'll end up with complicated and actually quite damaging, economically damaging taxes, whether it's on companies or on investment or what have you, which people can't see. They may be looking at the banks, they may be looking at the interest that the Bank of England pays on the debt that it holds. So there's a set of things you can think about there, which obviously they're not being open about. I would expect changes to capital gains tax, which I think, it's quite right not to talk about that beforehand, because if you do start talking about that, then people will avoid it.
Squirrel it away.
By selling now. So there are things that I think it's reasonable not to talk about, but I think there are also things where, if they've got plans, they should be telling us.
In this campaign, ministers are particularly saying that Mel Stride said to me this morning, taxes are falling. Eventually, he sort of conceded they might not. Would I be unfair to use the word dishonest of the claim that taxes have been falling?
It depends who you're talking about here. So it is both true that taxes are rising overall and are at their highest level as a fraction of national income for getting on for 70 years. And it is also true that someone on average earnings is paying less in direct tax than they have at any point in the last 50 years. So, I mean, this Tory government, to coin a phrase, has really hit the highest earners, and it's really taken loads of money from corporations. Corporation tax has gone up, whilst cutting, actually genuinely cutting tax on average earnings.
Just very briefly, Paul, if there's anything you want them to not say this week, what do you want us to stop saying?
Well, I wish they'd just stop saying what they're not going to do, because they tie themselves in knots. The more that they say we're not going to increase council tax or reform council tax, we're not going to increase income tax, we're not national insurance contributions and so on, the more they tie themselves into doing either just not being able to raise the money they might need, or raising it in ways that are actually more damaging than it would be if they were to do the more straightforward things.
Paul Johnson, thank you very much. No doubt we're going to have this conversation again.